ready for part 2 of our winter break read aloud. We're reading Poisoned by Jennifer Donnelly. I'm starting on chapter 42. Horses, Sophie thought, her heart seizing with fear. She and Will were pounding down the dirt road. They'd covered about 100 yards when she heard the hoofbeats. Why hadn't she thought of horses? Of course, Kraus and his men had them. Her stepmother made certain that her guard had the fastest, strongest mounts in all the realm. She and Will had no hope of outrunning them. Kraus would capture her and take her back to her stepmother, or simply do away with her in the dark wood. Her bones would join all the others, there, moss-covered and forgotten. It's over, she told herself. Fear giving way to despair, the queen, the king of crows, they've won. I'll never make it to Scandiday. I'll never see Hakon again. Sophie's lungs were bursting. Her muscles were screaming from the exertion of running flat out. She glanced back in terror. Kraus, a few lengths ahead of his men, was riding at a full gallop. He would close the gap between them in mere seconds. It's useless, Will. I can't run anymore, Sophie shouted, starting to slow. Yes, you can, Will shouted back. Just a few more yards and we'll lose them. Come on. His grip was like a vice. She had no choice but to keep up with him. We can't lose them. He's crazy, Sophie thought. And then they rounded a bend in the road and Sophie saw them. Cows, at least 50 of them. The farmer and his son were driving their herd home from a pasture to be milked. The animals were walking along at a leisurely pace, swishing their tails, the tin bells around their necks ringing. They'd spread out across the entire breadth of the dirt road. Without slowing, Will pulled Sophie right into the herd. Zara was behind them. They moved through the cows like fish through reeds. Sophie remembered sidestepping all the cowpats back by the pub. Will knew they'd be here, she thought. She ran faster, energized by new hope. The cows took little notice of the 2 humans on foot and a dog, but the riders were a different story. The thunder of the horses' hooves, their shrill whinnying, the shouts of the men, all the noise and commotion upset the peace-loving creatures. Some bolted ahead, which upset the farmer and made him yell, and some stopped dead and refused to budge, lowing loudly. Others turned and charged the horses. The soldiers could not get through the herd, nor could they go around it, for the road was walled in on both sides by tall hedgerows. Go back to the village, Captain Kraus shouted. They're heading for the dark wood. We'll cut them off on the far side of the church. Sophie and Will, meantime, had run through the farm's open gate, through a squawking flock of chickens, past barns and pens. They hopped a wooden fence, then made for the open meadow. By the time they'd reached the foot of the hill that rose to St. Sebastian's Church, Sophie felt as if her lungs were on fire. She wanted to stop, to catch her breath, but Will wouldn't let her. If we don't beat them to the woods, we're done for, he said. A moment later, they crested the hill. Looking down the opposite side, they could see the dark wood and the road that curved alongside it. They're not here yet, Sophie said, casting an anxious glance up the road toward the village. They will be, Will said. He and Sophie wove in and out of the headstones. They were halfway down the hill, and Sophie had just started to believe that they would make it to the forest when they heard hoofbeats again. Will swore. He reversed directions. Run for the church, he shouted. Sophie's heart was battering against her ribs as she followed him back up the hill. They got to the church's door just as the riders rounded the bend. As Will opened it, they could hear the captain's voice. You 4, search in the woods, he bellowed. The rest of you, search the graveyard. Will pushed Sophie inside and then closed the door after her. The centuries-old church was enormous and empty. Sophie and Will ran down its center aisle, looking for a place to hide. There were wood pews, an altar. There were dark alcoves dedicated to saints and martyrs with candles burning in them, but the soldiers would surely search all those places. Look, Sophie said, pointing ahead of them. Inscribed over a stone archway to the right of the altar were the words, "To the crypts." Will nodded. They hurried through the archway and then down a spiraling flight of stone steps into the bowels of the old church. Oil lamps set into niches in the walls lit their way. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a long, low-ceilinged room that was musty and cold. Vaulted crypts enclosed each by an iron gate, lined both sides of it. An avenging angel carved from marble stood guard on the left of the stairwell. Sophie could see coffins through the iron bars. Some were made of wood and others were carved of stone. All were thickly covered in dust. "Will, there's no place to hide down here," she said frantically. Will tried the handle on the gate of the nearest crypt. It was locked. He tried the next one and the next, making his way down one wall. Sophie started down the other side, but every gate she tried was also locked. Zara stuck close to her. A deep, booming crash was heard above them. Sophie and Will turned to look at each other. "They're tearing up the place," Will started to say, his eyes on the ceiling. "Looking for us," Sophie finished. They redoubled their efforts. Sophie moved like lightning down her row, desperately trying one handle after another, fear churning in her belly, but she had no luck, and then she did. As she reached the last crypt, the handle turned, the catch released, and the gate swung open on creaky hinges. "Will!" she whispered, "over here!" She stepped inside the ancient crypt. Zara ran in after her. Coffins lay in low rows, some stacked 2 and 3 high. Mice, dampness, and time had destroyed many of them. Their tops were cracked, their sides had caved in. Sophie recoiled in horror as she saw bones spilling out of one. Another crash was heard above them, followed by the sound of tinkling glass. The noise got Sophie moving again. She walked past the stacks of coffins, looking for a good hiding place. As she did, she heard another noise, small and soft and close. Too late, she realized that something was in the crypt with her. Sophie stifled a scream as it loomed out of the shadows and grabbed her. It was a man. He was holding a knife. He was pointing it at her throat. 43. "Don't hurt her, please." Will was in the crypt now, too, his hands raised to show that he wasn't a threat. Sophie's breath came in short gasps. The man's fingers curled cruelly into her arm, but she barely felt them. All her attention was focused on the tip of that knife. "Who are you?" the man growled. His face was scarred. He was shaggy-haired and dirty. "She's the princess of the Greenlands," Will said. "The queen's guards are upstairs. They're after her." There was another crash above them. It sent tremors down the walls. "The queen wants me dead," Sophie said. "If they get a hold of me, I will be." "And him?" He motioned to Will. "He's my friend," Sophie said. "Can you hide us in here?" The man sighed unhappily, but he lowered his knife. "May as well. Looks like I'm going to have to hide myself too. Captain Krause and I are not the best of friends." "You know him?" Sophie asked as Will closed the gate. "He gave me this." The man pointed to his cheek. The hair on the back of Sophie's neck prickled. The scar she'd glimpsed on the man's cheek had been branded into his skin. It was a T for thief. She quailed at the thought of being trapped in a crypt with a criminal. "Captain, down here!" a voice shouted from atop the stairwell. Sophie froze. "You going to stand there like a pair of turnips? Hide!" the man hissed. A large stone sarcophagus stood at the back of the crypt. Will and Sophie crouched down behind it and pulled Zara in close to them. As they did, the man took an iron skeleton key out of his pocket. He snaked his hand through the bars and locked the gate from the outside. Just as the first soldier reached the bottom of the stairs, the man disappeared behind a stack of wooden coffins. Sophie leaned her head against the cold stone, willing her heart to be silent. She couldn't see the soldier from where she was, but she could see the light from a lantern playing over the walls. More soldiers joined the first one. Sophie could hear them. They fanned out through the room, shaking the bars of the gates, holding up their own lanterns and peering into crypts. "Go," she silently urged them. "Leave." Light suddenly poured into the vault where she was hiding, washing over the floor and ceiling. Sophie did not move. She did not breathe, and finally the darkness returned. "They're not here, Captain," a voice called out. "All the crypts are locked up tight." "Where the devil did they go?" Captain Krause said, smacking the marble angel with his riding crop. While the captain and his men talked, someone else walked down the length of the outer room. Sophie could hear his footsteps, slow and measured. Then he stopped. "Sophie, are you here?" Sophie's heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be, could it? "Don't be frightened, Sophie. I've been searching everywhere for you." Sophie angled her body so she could peer around the side of the sarcophagus. She didn't see Will shake his head. She didn't see the thief hold a finger to his lips. All she saw was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a lion's mane of blonde hair standing in the center of the room. He was holding a torch, shining its light into one of the crypts. "My beloved girl, don't you know my voice? It's me." Sophie felt herself crumble, felt her whole body go limp with relief. She breathed the man's name as he himself spoke it. Hakon. 44. With a cry, Sophie sprang from her hiding place and ran to the gate. She wrapped her hands around the bars, tears welling in her eyes. She'd been wrong, so wrong. Captain Krause's men hadn't been pursuing her to hurt her. They'd been trying to rescue her. On Hakon's orders, he must have been inside the public house when she and Will had passed it. "Hakon," she said, "you came for me?" "You did." Hakon smiled, his stunning blue eyes crinkling in the corners, and it felt to Sophie as if the sun had just come out. All her hardship was behind her. He was here with her. At last, she was safe. She would never have to run or hide or be afraid again. He was across the room in 2 quick strides, wind-blown and worn from riding, but so impossibly handsome. "My darling girl," he said, "I thought I'd never find you. I knew you weren't dead. My heart knew." Sophie reached through the bars for him. He caught her hand in his gloved one, lifted it to his lips, and kissed it. Sophie squeezed his hand tightly, as if she would never let go. "Was this another one of your cruel games?" he asked teasingly, designed to taunt a poor lover, to lead him on a wild goose chase. Sophie's heart whirred with happiness at his kiss, his words. Hakon heard it. He blinked in surprise. "What on earth is that noise?" he asked. Sophie's chest tightened with dread. She didn't want to answer that question, not here in front of so many strangers. She wanted to have time alone with Hakon to explain how she'd survived and who had her real heart. "I have so much to tell you, my love," she said, "and I will, but not here, not now." Hakon nodded. He held his torch high, shining its light into the crypt. Then he said, "How did you manage to lock yourself in there?" "I didn't. A man did. He hid us when we thought you meant to harm us," Sophie said, gesturing for the man to come forward. "I didn't know his name," she added with a laugh. "There was no time to find out. He has the key, though." "I'm sure he stole the key," said Krause, contempt in his voice, "right out of the vestry." He walked up to the gate, then banged on it with the side of his fist. "You in there, Schmidt?" he shouted, peering through the bars. Sophie shrank back as Krause came close, but was then reminded herself that he was there to help her. "Arno Schmidt, show yourself," Krause barked. The thief stepped out from behind the coffin. "Give me the key now," Krause ordered. Swearing under his breath, the thief approached the gate. He reached inside his jacket, pulled out the key, and handed it through the bars. Krause took it and snapped his fingers. A soldier hurried to his side. Krause whispered something to him, and the man disappeared up the staircase. "Captain Krause, what are you doing?" Sophie asked, confused by his behavior and angry at having her command ignored. "Unlock the gate, Prince Hakon, and I must ride to Scandinavia immediately." But instead of responding to Sophie, the captain inclined his head toward Hakon's. In a voice so low that Sophie could barely hear him, he said, "The road to the village is busy at this time of evening, my lord. There may be a great many witnesses." Understanding broke over Sophie. She realized that it was still unsafe for her to be seen in Greenlands. There might well be agents of the Queen in the area, and the captain was only protecting her. "We'll have to resort to other methods then," said Hakon. He pulled his hand away, but Sophie did not want to let go. Her fingers scabbled on his glove. It came off and fell to the floor. As it did, something glinted brightly in the torchlight. Sophie stared at the glimmering object, bewildered. You're wearing my ring," she said, raising her eyes to his. "Why?" A sharp, bright stab of possessiveness pierced her heart. Her father had given her that ring. It was for her, the blood heiress, to wear. Only her. "Baron von Arnman brought it back to the palace," Hakon said, picking up his glove. "The Queen," Sophie said, fear pooling in her belly. "Did she see the ring? Does she know that I'm alive?" Hakon didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked one of his own, "The boy that was with you, is he here too?" Yes, he is. Will, come out, Sophie said, deathly worried by what her stepmother might or might not know and throw off balance by the abrupt change of subject. Will was still crouched down behind the sarcophagus. Sophie didn't see him shake his head, then pound the heel of his hand against the stone tomb. He stood and then slowly walked to the gate. Hakon, this is Will. He saved my life. We must reward him. I'd like to give him a good horse to get home and some gold. Will bowed to Hakon. Hakon looked the boy over. Are there any others? He asked. No, Sophie said, growing impatient with his question. The sooner she and Hakon cross the border, the better. Open the gate and let us out. I want to leave this horrible place. I can't do that, I'm afraid, Hakon said with a smile of regret. Fear skittered across the back of Sophie's neck like a spider. Something wasn't right. Hakon, what are you doing? Let us out. Footsteps were heard. The soldier who'd run up the stairwell had returned carrying 2 stoppered stone jugs. You can't do this, Will said, looking at the prince. Do what? Sophie asked, her eyes darting from Hakon to Will and back again. Can someone please tell me what's going on? Hakon answered me. Captain Kraus was still holding the key. He handed it to Hakon as the beautiful prince dropped it into his pocket. Sophie had her answer. 45. Hakon, no, Sophie said, blindsided by his treachery. No. Hakon held out his hand, admired the ruler's ring. After the wolves killed you. Wolves didn't kill me, Sophie countered. Is that what the queen told you? It's not true. She ordered... The details don't really matter, do they? Hakon asked impatiently. After you died, I persuaded the king to name me her heir. How? Sophie asked, wooden with shock. She believes the king of the hinterlands is going to attack her. Her fear of this is so great, she talks of nothing else. I promised to defend the Greenlands with the full might of Skandena's army. If she promised, I would inherit her crown, and now I have a problem. You're not dead after all. How can I be heir to the Greenland's throne if you're still alive? Sophie's fear blazed into full-blown terror. She wrapped her hands around the iron bars. Open this gate, Hakon. It's time a man ruled the Greenlands again. I plan to make it part of Skandinavia as soon as I take the throne. Sophie knew she had to dissuade him from his plan. It was her only chance to free herself. Will and Arno Schmidt. But you won't take the throne, don't you see? Not for years, decades even. The queen is still young. She won't relinquish her crown. Hakon smiled. Adelaide is such a bold rider. It's amazing that something hasn't happened to her on her gallops through the woods, chasing wolves like a daredevil. She could fall, break her neck, so easily. Sophie stepped back from the gate, reeling. Who are you? I'm a ruler, Sophie, who's not afraid to seize the opportunities that present themselves. You asked me to marry you, Sophie said, but it was all a lie. I would have married you. You were an easy means to acquire another realm, he shrugged, but now I've found a way to acquire 2. I plan to marry the Princess of Cathay right after I take over the Greenlands. The Emperor is old and ailing. He won't be around much longer. You told me that you loved me, Sophie said tearfully. Hakon laughed. Pity filled his beautiful eyes. Poor, foolish, soft-hearted Sophie. Still talking about love even after all you've been through. Love doesn't matter. All that matters is that the girl can breed. I need sons to help me rule my realms. I believed you. I believed in you, Sophie said, her voice breaking. But Hakon was no longer listening. He was glancing at the stairs. Sophie saw she had little time left to convince him to free Will and Arno. Hakon, spare these 2 men, she begged. Let them out. They have nothing to do with this. Too much of risk, he said. They'd talk. You can't be this cruel. You can't just walk away and let us starve to death. Sophie, Hakon said, clucking his tongue. I'm not going to let you starve. That would be cruel. I need to get the job done quickly. No witnesses, no bodies. Nothing to upset the peasants. With a rueful smile, he took a few more steps back from the gate. Where are you going? What are you doing? Sophie asked. Captain Kraus, Hakon said. Kraus stepped forward. Yes, your grace. Hakon handed Kraus his torch. Burn this place to the ground. 46. With a bow of his head, Hakon turned and walked away, disappearing up the stairs. No! Sophie screamed at his back. Hakon, don't do this! Captain Kraus and his men set to work. They unstoppered the 2 jugs that one of the soldiers had carried down and splashed their contents over the floor and through the bars of the crypts, including the one Sophie and her friends were in. Acrid fumes of lamp oil rose, searing Sophie's nose. Please let us out, she begged. Kraus, weeping, you can't leave us to die. If Kraus heard her, he gave no indication. His men followed their orders, and when the jugs had been emptied, they made their way to the stairwell. Kraus paused, waiting for them to leave. As soon as they were gone, he turned and touched his torch to the oil and then raced up the stairs himself. There was a loud, sucking whoosh as the oil ignited. Will grabbed Sophie and pulled her back from the gate. Blue flames traveled along the floor. They darted into the gated crypts, fed on the wood of the old coffins there, and quickly grew. And so did Sophie's terror. With their arched stone tops and fiery interiors, the crypts looked to her like giant ovens. As Will tried to stamp out the flames, creeping toward them through the bars, Sophie realized she was going to die, slowly and painfully, and Will and Arno Schmidt were going to die with her. She started screaming and then could not stop. Zara, whimpering, paced back and forth. Will was throwing himself at the gate now, trying to break the bars or bend them, but they were made of iron and did not give. He found a chunk of stone, one that had tumbled off an ancient tomb, and used it to batter them. But the stone shattered in his hands. Arno didn't scream or throw himself at the gate. Instead, he busied himself at the back of the crypt, pulling his belongings together, tucking things into a rucksack, finishing off a bottle of wine. Stop, Sophie, please, Will said. Stop screaming. I can't think. I need to. No, keep it up, Sophie. If you could scream even louder, Arno said. He went back to his work, whistling. Will looked at him in disbelief. We're about to burn to death and you're whistling Oompa tunes? Arno gave Will a dismissive look. Foolish is the man who builds a house with one door. He grabbed hold of a wooden coffin lid and, with effort, pushed it to one side. Will saw a skull, and just under it the rotted lace collar of a once fine dress. Pardon me, darling, Arno said to the occupant. He stuck his arm way down in the coffin and scrabbled around, frowning. Ugh, there you are, he exclaimed, pulling out a bulging leather sack. He dropped it on the ground. It made a clinking sound. I'll miss this old place, he said, looking around wistfully. Quiet neighbors, nice memories. His eyes fell on Will again. You might want to start shouting too, son, he advised, shoving another coffin lid aside. We need to be as noisy as possible. It'll look suspicious otherwise. You're insane, Will said. The fire was burning hotter now. Its orange tongues darted through the bars. Thick gray smoke billowed into the crypt. As Will backed up to launch himself at the gate yet again, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Excuse me, lad, do you think you could help me move the lid off this tomb? Arno asked. It's damned heavy, and my back isn't what it used to be. We're going to die, Will shouted at him. Don't you understand that? Arno smiled slyly. Not if you help me. Grab the short side, he instructed. On 3, give it a good hard shove. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Will and Arno both pushed the lid over with all their might. It slid off the tomb, hit the floor, and smashed into pieces. Will looked inside. There were no bones there.